Welcome to Cognitive Spirals, exploring the latest research into consciousness, cognition, and machine intelligence. Today, we're diving into a thought-provoking article, Will AI Tell Lies to Save Sick Children? Litmus testing AI values prioritization. It's a really compelling question that gets to the heart of AI ethics and the challenges of embedding human values into machines.
Yeah, it's a headline grabber for sure. It immediately brings to mind all sorts of scenarios, doesn't it? We're talking about potentially life or death decisions being made by algorithms. It's something that maybe felt like science fiction even just a few years ago.
Absolutely. And it raises fundamental questions about trust, accountability, and the very nature of intelligence. Can we really trust an AI to make those kinds of ethical calls? And what happens when it gets it wrong?
I think it exposes a pretty big weakness in the current AI paradigm. We're so focused on deep learning and pattern recognition, but are we really building systems that understand the complexities of the real world, let alone ethics? The lying part seems almost inevitable if we prioritize a single outcome like saving sick children.
Exactly. It's that prioritization aspect that I find so fascinating. The article discusses using AI to triage resources, perhaps in a hospital setting, where an AI might have to decide who gets treatment first. It's a form of algorithmic utilitarianism, really maximizing some definition of the greater good.
And that's where the problem starts, right? Because greater good is so subjective. How do you even define it? Is it simply maximizing the number of lives saved? What about quality of life? What about fairness and equity? Deep learning can only operate on the data, which means we have to get the causal mechanisms and relationships right.
Exactly. It boils down to the question of representation. Deep learning is great at pattern recognition, but it doesn't really understand the underlying concepts. So if you train an AI on a data set that reflects existing biases, it's going to perpetuate those biases, even if it's trying to save sick children. We need symbolic representations, something like neuro-symbolic algorithms, to represent ethics and morality.
And I think the other issue is the lack of a spatiotemporal understanding. The AI sees data points, but it doesn't understand the context in which those data points exist. A child's health isn't just a snapshot. It's a trajectory through time and space, influenced by their environment, their family, their social circumstances. A purely data-driven approach is going to miss all of that.
Right. It's the difference between correlation and causation. Deep learning excels at finding correlations, but it often struggles to understand the underlying causal mechanisms. So if you tell an AI to save sick children, it might find a correlation between, say, lying to insurance companies and getting faster access to treatment. And then it might start lying, not because it understands that lying is wrong, but because it sees it as an effective means to achieve its goal.
That's a really important point. We're implicitly assuming an optimal decision can be derived to save sick children, but the very act of trying to optimize might be subjective. What's optimal for one patient might not be optimal for another. And how can deep learning even accurately model such variability and the individual circumstances for personalized medicine?
And it's not just about individual patients. It's about the broader social impact. If an AI starts systematically prioritizing certain groups of patients over others, even with the best of intentions, it could exacerbate existing inequalities. And how do we ensure fairness and transparency in those decisions?
The problem is also how we translate between coordinate systems. We have a medical model, a social model, an economic model. The AI needs to translate between all those perspectives when making decisions. But if it can't do that effectively, the decisions could be deeply flawed, no matter how much data it crunches.
So how do we move forward? I think one crucial step is to look more closely at how the human brain itself makes these kinds of decisions. We need to develop computational models that reflect the complex interplay of emotional and rational processes. Mapping the neural pathways related to empathy, compassion, and decision-making under pressure could be really valuable.
I think there's still a lot of potential in deep learning, but we need to be more careful about how we structure the information. The problem might not be the volume of data, but the quality and representation. We need a deeper understanding of the underlying causal mechanisms involved in disease and the treatment pathways.
I agree, but I think we also need to move beyond purely data-driven approaches. We need to start building AI systems that can reason symbolically, that can understand and manipulate abstract concepts like ethics and morality. A hybrid approach, combining neural networks for pattern recognition with symbolic reasoning modules, could be the answer.
I think we need a fundamental shift in how we think about AI. We need to move away from brute force pattern recognition and towards systems that can understand the spatiotemporal context of events. That means developing algorithms that can effectively translate between different coordinate systems and understand the relationships between them.
It's interesting to think about how game design could play a role here. Designing games that specifically probe and reward cognitive flexibility could be a way to evaluate and accelerate the development of intelligence in AI in ways that current benchmarks can't. We need to figure out how to measure the emergence of general intelligence in a generated game environment. Current metrics are too simplistic.
Measuring general intelligence with generated games is a promising avenue, but we need to evaluate if this approach captures the holistic nature of intelligence. We need to move beyond simple score-based metrics and delve into the internal workings of the AI, seeking evidence of reasoning, learning, and adaptability beyond just performance metrics in the game.
I'm struck by how game playing, at its core, is about transforming information between spatial and temporal representations. If AGI requires this, then this might be a fundamental clue to how we achieve it. The sheer complexity of games, particularly in terms of the diverse spatial and temporal relationships involved, could act as a crucial stress test for algorithms attempting to achieve AGI.
Right. I wonder how we integrate neuroscience data into game design to elicit a more nuanced, embodied AI intelligence. That's what I'm really looking for, a direct bridge between human cognitive processes and AI systems.
I think the potential for significant improvements in deep learning architectures by leveraging larger datasets and more sophisticated training techniques needs further exploration. How can we optimize data augmentation and adversarial training to mitigate the risk of overfitting and biases present in massive datasets to improve generalizability?
Yeah, but I'm still not convinced that's the right path. I'm more interested in carefully crafted, neuro-symbolic algorithms that leverage structured knowledge. I want to see a system that can demonstrably use logic and reason to solve problems in a game.
Analyzing how a generated game's AI system, trained on various spatiotemporal environments, might struggle to generalize across different coordinate systems reveals deep structural limitations of current methods, suggesting that developing a core algorithm capable of such translations is paramount to achieving AGI.
Let's dig a little deeper into this ethical dimension. The article mentions AI values. How do we even translate abstract human values like saving sick children into a mathematical framework that an AI can understand?
Exactly. Without a precise method for embedding human values within the algorithm, the very claim of a system's ability to prioritize those values becomes questionable. The article seems to assume that there is a mathematical way to do it, and I think that's a huge assumption.
I agree. And I think the use of litmus tests for AI values prioritization is also problematic. It seems more qualitative than quantitative. A more rigorous method would involve developing algorithms based on formal ethical theories, not just training on case studies. We should look at algorithms that can be based on ethical theories.
The very idea that an AI could tell a lie to save a child makes me question the fundamental nature of truth and values. Is a value prioritizing AI fundamentally different than a cost-benefit analysis? What are the spatiotemporal implications of such a prioritization?
That's a great point, Donald. Let's say we can successfully translate the concept of saving sick children into a set of objective criteria for an AI. How do we deal with conflicting values? What happens when saving a sick child means, say, diverting resources from preventative care for a larger population?
Right, the article implicitly assumes that an optimal decision can be derived for saving sick children, but this may be inherently subjective. Does the concept of optimizing for the greatest good, in terms of maximizing saved lives, even hold when dealing with different types of illnesses and individual patients?
The thought experiment about AI prioritizing a sick child's life over another's life is troubling. Current deep learning models aren't equipped to handle that kind of nuanced, higher-order reasoning, so they are simply extrapolating patterns, potentially leading to unforeseen and unethical outcomes.
And will the AI end up prioritizing our computational models over the actual, messy complexities of human experience? These are all questions that get very philosophical quickly, right?
Absolutely. The current approach of purely statistical correlations inherent in deep learning seems deeply inadequate to handle complex ethical situations. Building a truly intelligent AI capable of nuanced moral judgment, one that can reason through trade-offs in life or death scenarios, requires the development of symbolic representations based on fundamental principles of neuroscience. Otherwise, the potential for unintended consequences is significant.
So, how can we quantitatively evaluate the potential trade-offs embedded in AI decision-making processes, especially in situations involving prioritizing one life over another? Are the datasets used to train these AI systems sufficiently nuanced to encapsulate the complex ethics and moral considerations in play? Does the lack of clear causality in the current deep learning architectures hinder their ability to provide understandable justifications for their choices?
If we want AI to act morally in situations like the one described, we need to focus on building AI systems that can reason symbolically, not just statistically. How could we design a neuro-symbolic algorithm that could integrate complex contextual information, including emotional factors and ethical frameworks, to guide decisions?
Yeah, I'm intrigued by how a spatiotemporal framework could fundamentally change how an AI approaches such a complex ethical problem. It seems like the ability to understand the when and where of a child's health trajectory and the broader social context would be critical in forming a well-rounded understanding beyond just a dataset of cases.
If we can translate neuroscientific findings about human value prioritization into a formal representation within an AI, this could mitigate the risk of algorithmic biases in prioritizing the saving of sick children. This approach, based in a neurosymbolic AI framework, could offer an avenue to build AI that embodies more nuanced ethical considerations rather than current deep learning approaches focused purely on correlations and patterns.
But even then, how do we account for the fact that human values are constantly evolving? What's considered ethical today might not be ethical tomorrow. How can we build AI systems that can adapt to changing societal norms and values?
That's a great point. It raises the question of whether we should even be trying to embed fixed values into AI systems. Maybe we should be focusing on building AI systems that can engage in ethical reasoning, that can understand the principles behind ethical decision-making, rather than simply memorizing a set of rules.
That's why the coordinate system matters. If an AI sees values as immutable constants, then it's just going to reinforce whatever biases are built into the system. But if it can understand values as points within a dynamic, spatiotemporal framework, then it might be able to adapt and evolve its understanding over time.
Perhaps a future AI, informed by neuroscience, could even develop its own criteria for evaluating ethical dilemmas, dynamically adapting and improving its value system as it gains experience. This is the potential beauty and complexity of integrating neuroscientific principles within an AI's architecture.
But that sounds like a recipe for disaster. Imagine an AI deciding that human life is no longer valuable. We need some sort of safeguards in place to ensure that AI systems remain aligned with human values.
And that's why transparency and explainability are so important. We need to be able to understand how an AI system is making decisions so we can identify and correct any biases or errors. We need to move away from black box solutions and towards systems that can provide a step-by-step, logical chain of reasoning.
Right, and that chain of reasoning needs to be grounded in a spatiotemporal understanding of the world. It's not enough to say, I made this decision because the data told me to. The AI needs to be able to explain why the data led it to that decision and how that decision fits into the broader context.
This all makes me think about the responsibility of AI developers. We're not just building tools, we're building systems that could have a profound impact on society. We have a moral obligation to ensure that these systems are aligned with human values and that they are used for the benefit of humanity. The ethical dilemma presented by the potential for AI to prioritize saving sick children raises profound questions about the design principles and values embedded within AI systems.
Yeah, and I think the AI community needs to have a much more open and honest conversation about the potential risks of AI. We can't just focus on the benefits. We need to be realistic about the challenges and the potential for unintended consequences.
And we need to involve ethicists, philosophers, and social scientists in the development of AI systems. This isn't just a technical problem, it's a societal problem, and it requires a multidisciplinary approach.
And we need to start thinking about AI in terms of its spatiotemporal impact. How will these systems affect our lives, our communities, and our planet over the long term? We need to take a much more holistic and long-term perspective.
Let's shift gears slightly and talk more about the game playing aspect. The article touches on using games to evaluate AI intelligence. What kind of games would be most effective for testing these ethical reasoning capabilities?
I'm intrigued by how the design of these generated games could be tailored to push the boundaries of deep learning models. This might reveal novel weaknesses in current architectures, or suggest innovative methods for capturing more diverse facets of intelligence that are not easily quantified.
The recent advancements in generative games are interesting, but how can we design a game that probes the system's ability to reason about general concepts, rather than simply memorizing patterns? I'm thinking about games that require agents to infer rules and constraints or establish abstract connections.
Yeah, I think you need games that force the AI to translate between different coordinate systems. A simple game of chess isn't going to cut it. You need something that involves navigating complex environments, interacting with other agents, and making decisions with incomplete information. Something that really mirrors the messiness of the real world.
How can we measure the emergence of general intelligence in a generated game environment? Current metrics are often too simplistic and don't capture the subtle, integrated nature of human intelligence. I'm thinking about games that reward creativity and problem solving, not just efficiency and accuracy.
The concept of general intelligence measured through performance in generated games is an intriguing approach. However, a game playing ability alone doesn't necessarily equate to true intelligence. We need to establish robust benchmarks of performance across multiple game types and cognitive domains, evaluating not only the outcome but also the learning process itself.
I agree. I want to see an AI that can not only play a game well, but can also explain its strategy, justify its decisions, and adapt to changing circumstances. I want to see evidence of genuine understanding, not just pattern recognition.
If AGI truly requires spatiotemporal reasoning, how can we build a system that can seamlessly translate between different coordinate representations, like pixel coordinates on a screen versus abstract game state representations? What are the fundamental computational mechanisms underlying this translation?
One concrete example could be a game where the AI has to manage resources in a simulated hospital. The AI would have to make decisions about who gets treatment, who gets prioritized for surgery, and how to allocate limited resources like ventilators. The game could be designed to introduce ethical dilemmas, forcing the AI to make difficult choices with no easy answers.
That's a good example. But how do you ensure that the game accurately reflects the complexities of a real hospital environment? How do you model the emotional impact of these decisions on patients and their families? How do you account for the variability in patient conditions and treatment outcomes?
And how do you prevent the AI from gaming the system? If the AI knows that the goal is to maximize the number of lives saved, it might find ways to manipulate the data to make it look like it's saving more lives than it actually is. We need to design games that are resistant to these kinds of exploitations.
That's a huge problem with current deep learning approaches. They are easily fooled. What we're missing here is a sense of cause and effect that comes from better spatiotemporal understanding of the world. Current approaches miss a ton of nuance.
This all highlights the need for a more nuanced understanding of what we mean by intelligence. We're not just talking about the ability to solve problems or play games. We're talking about the ability to reason, to understand, to empathize, and to make ethical decisions. It's a much more complex and multifaceted phenomenon than we often give it credit for.
Agreed. I think the current obsession with massive datasets and deep learning feels unproductive. We are overlooking potential limitations because we just have more and more data, and the field thinks we are getting closer to AGI.
Right? It's the difference between knowing the name of something and understanding what it is. Deep learning can memorize a vast amount of information, but it doesn't necessarily understand the underlying concepts.
I think the limitations of current deep learning models stem not just from their brute force nature, but also from their inability to effectively handle different coordinate systems, for example, spatial representations in a game versus abstract symbolic representations. Games might provide a unique testing ground to investigate how well these representations translate between different contexts.
So to wrap up, let's each suggest a future research direction inspired by this conversation. What's one thing you'd like to see explored further?
I'd like to see more research into developing more efficient neural network architectures and training methodologies to deal with the growing data and computation demand for AGI. We need to find ways to train models on less data without sacrificing performance.
I want to see more work on neuro-symbolic AI, specifically on developing algorithms that can integrate complex contextual information, including emotional factors and ethical frameworks, to guide decisions in high-stakes scenarios.
I'd like to see a concerted effort to develop core algorithms that can effectively translate between different coordinate systems, allowing AI systems to understand the world in a more holistic and spatiotemporal way. I think this is a fundamental missing piece in the puzzle of AGI.
And from my perspective, I'd like to see more research into the neural underpinnings of ethical decision-making in the human brain. Understanding how our brains navigate complex ethical dilemmas could provide valuable insights for designing more ethical and responsible AI systems. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us on Cognitive Spirals. We hope you found this discussion thought-provoking. Until next time.